magic in speaking isn't in the words, but in how you read the room and respond in real time. Now, in today's show, we dive into how comedy teaches us to stay present, pivot when something clicks or flops, and connect at a deeper level with our audience. You ready? Let's go. Today's guest, Kevin Hubschmann, is a comedian, entrepreneur, and business professional who founded Laugh Inc. His job is to blend comedy, improv, and a little bit of behavioral science. And his superpowers? Adaptability. But you know what? He'll do a whole lot better introducing himself than I will. So, Kevin Hubschmann, you are on the clock. Take over.
I was the first 10 employees of this software company called Splash. And while I was getting my career going there, I was doing improv at night, 3 hours a week with my best friend and my two brothers. We were called the Brothers in Flaws, and we would just have an absolute blast doing improv. And we were just feeling great. But then the next day at work, I suddenly felt everything was a bit slower and everything felt a lot easier. And it was my first insight into that, oh my gosh, I'm training to become a better comedian, but I'm actually training to be a better business professional. And ever since then, I've really attributed all the training that I've done with improv. I eventually got deeper into stand-up comedy, and those skills that I learned allowed me to really level up professionally. Started a sales team that ended up growing to like 20 plus people. The company that I just worked at got sold last summer that I started at. So a lot of great, endings to those tales. But anyways, it's allowed me to really say comedy is a superpower. You don't have to be funny to use comedy skills. And that's what I go around trying to help people really understand, that we can learn a lot from comedians and we can learn a lot from training in comedy, and we don't have to be performing.
Outstanding. He came right in under 2 minutes, as I knew he would. Pleasure to have you here. I want to dive in on that behavioral science part. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing to back up what we do is saying, okay, what does science say about it? So, when we started our business, a lot of it was around the idea of like, we just want to connect comedians who are out of work because of the pandemic. Legally, they could not work. So they weren't allowed in those spaces. So I was able to work with like the best comedians in the world on these corporate shows, and I would bring them in and they would do great stuff. And that was super awesome for like that year and a half where people were really isolated. But then when the budget started to dry up, people had to start to be like, why? So I was like, okay, I got to start making a compelling reason as to why these companies need to keep investing. So I teamed up with Dr. Natalie DiTillo, who is a psychologist out of Harvard Medical School. And I started to ask her a lot of questions of like, what happens when we laugh? And we would actually even go to companies and, talk about this stuff. But, just from a biological standpoint, there's a lot of other things that we can go into behavioral science wise, but at a high level, what biologically is happening to us when we laugh. Our cortisol levels are decreasing, that stress hormone. Our endorphins are shooting up, that feel-good hormone. And when we're laughing with other people, we're getting that release of oxytocin, and we're feeling more connected with people. We're sharing in that moment. So anytime you're at a comedy club and you're hanging out with a bunch of strangers, or you see a comedy show and you're like, I feel connected to these people for some reason, it's because biologically that's what's happening. And so that was like the start of going, okay, there's actually something to this beyond just liking laughter or knowing laughter is the best medicine. There's literal science behind it, and I've always just followed that since.
It's interesting. I teach sales. First of all, sound like a good salesman. And I don't mean in terms of people say that, he's trying to sell you something. I don't mean you're trying to sell me something. I mean, you're well thought out. People think you can just walk in and sell something, and I suppose you could if you're taking an order, but sometimes you actually have to get into the psychology of, well, what cycle are they going through? Where are they in that decision process? How do I measure that? And so I appreciate the fact that the zeroid in me, I worked for Xerox for a number of years and we
Mhm.
measured everything. The zeroid in me loves the fact that you're really kind of trying to make a science and measure this as opposed to, well, go up and just, own the stage, make them laugh. Easy to say. And for a natural, maybe, but I don't know how much help you can be just throwing out those types of suggestions. So good on you.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it can I mean, I started in sales and I still sell every day. But I started in a more traditional sales role and a lot of it had it's a lot of it is storytelling at the end of the day because you have to tell a story then that story needs to be relayed back to your champion. And then that champion needs to understand your story and the why in very simple terms to then finish that game of telephone to whoever needs to sign the check.
Yeah.
And so I've always felt, and that's a great, thing I learned in stand up. Well, first with that first call that I would have with people, actively listening. How am I actively listening, not interrupting by telling them my pitch, but then when it is my time to learn or to give my pitch, how can I do it in the fewest words possible in the least convoluted way so that they can take that bite-sized information or that one stat from me hearing what they were interested in and they can take that back and go, oh, well, we should invest in improv because Google saw a 30% increase in ideas generated, or Salesforce saw an increase, percentage increase in sales conversions. So how can we use that data to be like, what do they care about? And that's going to make people, stick out.
Yeah. I appreciate the fact you have a sales background. I'd love to talk about that more, but I'm not allowed to.
Okay.
Although, boy, when we get off the air, we're talking more about that. I would add one more thing to what you said. I love what you just said in terms of as few words as possible. And in my mind, I'm always thinking, and as many of their words as possible. I don't care what I call it. You called it that. That's what we'll call it for right now. And
Mhm.
we'll fix that. But I think we get into our language a little too much, even when we're condensing. But all right, I got a burning question for you because we got a comedian in the family on this side. And this guy, I'm always hearing, hey, when you're a comedian, bombing's not a big deal. Hey, I learn from it. Every comedian, but you wear it like a badge of honor, this whole bombing thing. Me as a corporate guy, I'm like, oh yeah. So my question is, what can businesses learn from comedians on how to handle failure? Because apparently I'm not doing it real well. I can't sleep at night when I quote unquote bomb.
Yeah, I mean, your son nailed it. I think bombing is just as important as succeeding when it comes to comedy. And if you ask any comedian, like, hey, what's your best killing story? They'll probably draw a blank, but you ask any comedian, like, what's your best bombing story? They're like, which one do you want to hear? There's so many different times because in order to get that kill and to actually really own a room, you need to bomb and you bomb all the time. And I think that when I think about bombing, I think about it in two things. One, calluses. Bombing is, when people go on stage and start out their careers, they hit open mics first. They go into places where they can try stuff out. Maybe nobody's in the audience. It's kind of very low stakes. You're failing in front of a small group of people. So I always call that like low stakes stages. How can you find those low stakes stages to try material out? And in the real world, that could be a coffee chat, that could be a Zoom, that could be a phone call with somebody that's your mom or something. Who cares? It's whatever these micro stages are that you can create. Comedians get them in the form of these open mics. But then if you do get another opportunity and maybe you bomb on a higher stage, it's just a callus. And so those calluses are really what make comedians so strong is that they are creating an environment for themselves that bombing is just part of the job. And bombing is an outcome that might happen. And when they go into that knowing that that's a possibility, that kind of takes the pressure out of it, to know that that always could happen. knowing that there's also the other side of it, that you can go the exact opposite way. And that's where preparation comes into play. And you
Right.
say, all right, why did I bomb that last time? Was it because I didn't prepare hard enough, or I used this word where I shouldn't have? So how would I look at the data a bit more? And what I love to do early on in my career, and anytime I'm trying out new material, say I'm doing 5 minutes. Maybe I bomb nearly the whole time. I get on off stage and I'm like, holy crap, that was terrible. But I recorded the set so I can listen back to the set and hear it. And I listen to it and I go, man, that was terrible. What a horrible experience. I never want to do this again. But then I hear a gasp or a laugh of a 5 second increment. And I go, 5 seconds. I can use that 5 seconds. Let me snag that and let me use that again and use that in my next set that I'm going to try. I can throw out the 455 or I can just rework it, but I'm going to keep that 5 seconds. And so that failure allows me to compound the win and say 5 seconds. Okay, I can turn that 5 seconds. Maybe that's a setup. Let me try out a few new punchlines. Okay, now that 5 seconds turned to 15 seconds. Okay, now I got them laughing, and maybe I can add a couple more tags in. Now that 15 seconds can turn into 30 seconds. And so when you start to frame your failures as data around a success, you can really start to build all of those different and compound those different successes that ultimately create a more long form thing.
Yeah. I'm hearing like a point counterpoint here. I want to be Dan Aykroyd. Jane, you ridiculous person. Got it. And I'm not telling you it isn't valuable, but now you're seeing the difference between a comedian's life and a professional speaker's life. We have those open mics. We call them the Rotary Club. We call them the library. Okay.
Mhm.
And yet we are busting our tail and we'll never celebrate it. We'll be very quiet about it. In other words, we'll never let an audience know we just bombed. Now,
Mhm.
in our mind, we went, oh, boy, that looked better on paper. Ooh, that took so longer than I thought. I'm thinking of this show, first episode. Ooh, I had an idea for an opening that really didn't work. But this is the first time I'm even talking about it because I would never tell my audience that we
Mhm.
are sort of magicians in terms of we don't tell people when the trick isn't working.
Mhm.
It isn't working. People might be looking around going, I thought he was funnier than that or whatever, but we'll never give in to, sorry, I'm bombing. Okay.
Yeah.
Comedians like to talk about it on stage too. I think this is where we divert. Everything else the same.
Yeah.
Everyone says, I remember even in high school, do it to a mirror, do it. Mirrors are ridiculous in my opinion. They don't talk back. They don't give you any emotion. I know we've got to put this in front of a group in a corporate gig, even when we are bombing. We don't talk. We just keep fighting. We keep
Yeah.
throwing energy and enthusiasm at the fire, and then
Mhm.
survive it. And one last thing, I honestly believe. I'd love to get some emails on this. I honestly believe where you said a comedian can remember the bombs but not the kills, the killing, the great sessions. Complete opposite. I can remember a few bombs. I choose not to remember them.
Yeah.
But I can tell you the times where the audience just lit up, where everything was working. It just was magical. There was never a time to take a sip of water because it never stopped.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that's just a slight difference between our two professions, and particularly because even in the Rotary Club, I don't want to fail the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
And I know you don't either. But I'm just saying, there's no celebration on this side. It's devastating. Anyway, and I always
Well,
remind people, you're as good as your last presentation. Go ahead.
yeah. I think that yeah, don't get me wrong. If you asked me when the last time I killed was, I can tell you the exact date and the time of my
There you
set and
go.
everyone that was around me, and like I can tell you everybody that was on the lineup. I can
Hmm.
tell you where I was in it. So don't get me wrong, I can do that, but I also know like the bombs are everywhere and they can happen, but that's just like what happens when you try new stuff.
Right.
And I think that like that's a really good identifier, is like really trying new things and like what new things can you throw at a wall, but also like with comedy you're trying it in front of different audiences and saying like, well, this audience liked this and this audience liked that. And I think the difference between that and maybe some presentations in the corporate setting is like you're very clear as to like who's going to be in the audience. Like I'm doing a keynote in November that's going to be for healthcare professionals. I know that a lot of my material is going to be dialed in for healthcare professionals, going to be different than if I was talking to a sales team. I get that beauty of like getting the prep ahead of time to know who's going to be in the room. When it comes to comedy, it's always a crapshoot. Maybe the only
Mhm.
thing that people have in common is that they live in the area, and then you are kind of on your own. So, there's definitely tons of similarities. And what I would say, like, yeah, I think that I just think that bombing is very important, and comics don't love doing it. It's just like part of the gig, and it's part of like what you have to do. And I think that, I've seen it again on both sides as presenting in front of corporate audiences as well. In less comedic settings, there's just kind of an opportunity to try it. I love what you said about you never tell them you're bombing. I have so many opportunities where like I host a lot of shows and my job also is producer. So I need to make sure like, oh man, that comic canceled. The show's at 8, comic canceled at 7. I got to fill the time. The amount of stuff that happens between 7 and 8. And then I have to get up on stage and act like nothing happened because the audience doesn't know. And you don't have to tell them that something as bad is going on because they're so oblivious. So I think that's actually something that can really be a similarity is like, it sometimes it helps as a comedian to let the air out of the room and go, boy, is this going bad.
Right.
And they call it the spotlight effect. I think that's something that I've heard. And that is like, okay, if you say it out loud and you're spotlighting, it's not as bad as it really is, and you're letting people in on your Schadenfreude potentially. But then, at the same time, uh, keeping that to yourself and making it a show and a magic show is really helpful because the audience almost never notices the minute details that you think you messed up.
Right. And Johnny Carson as a classic wasn't it was he always did that. And some of his best to me, his best work was when, a joke wasn't working so well and he spotlighted it, as you said, and brought the audience with him a little bit. But we never felt sorry for Johnny Carson. I think that's where we're at right now. I think the big thing in corporate, and maybe it's the same in comedy, is the cardinal sin is drop something, pick it up, find that you can make any mistake you want. But the moment you make the audience feel sorry for you,
Hmm.
like when you go, oh, I
Oh, it's
normally
game
do this, but
over.
I can't find it. Oh,
Oof.
it's like being in a movie theater and you just put the lights on.
Yeah,
We're out of
totally.
the experience and now we're obsessed with how you're feeling and in a corporate gig, that's death.
Hmm. I mean, same thing with the joke. I think you hit the nail on the head when when you're trying a joke and you hear and your goal is for them to laugh at like your misery, but then you realize that the joke hits in a different way and they go, "Ooh,
Yeah.
ouch." And you're like, "No, not what I
Don't feel
intended."
sorry for me.
Don't feel sorry for me because when you feel sorry for me, like you're feeling sorry for me, not the character. I'm trying to create a character on
Yeah.
stage for you, and you're buying too much into the like you guys maybe have too much empathy, but then that is on the performer to go, okay, I didn't set it up properly. I
Right.
have to really change it. And so, that is like that's a form of bombing, but then the best thing is like, okay, I need to tweak one part of it. What's the part I need to tweak? Let me try it again. All right, it didn't work again. Let me try it again. Oh, it worked this time. And so I think that is, maybe again, I just I find bombing so valuable because just bombing is data.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think we're on the same page here. Particularly, we found something which is if you got bomb, but don't make this, but don't make the audience feel sorry for you that you're
No,
bombing.
no,
When
no.
Johnny bombed, and I'm certainly sure the more modern comedians when they bomb, you don't feel sorry for them. You feel almost more bonded to them that they shared this sweet moment. Let's get to
Exactly.
your adaptability, sir. You how do you adapt? We all want to hear this one. When you have an audience that shows up, I don't want to call out a part of the country, but it might rhyme with the mid zest. And they're just low reactors. The sweetest people in the world, but they're low reactors. And you can be in Brooklyn and have an audience of low reactors too. But
Hmm.
How do you handle a dead room as a comedian?
I think predominantly the shows that I'm performing in are in the New York City area, and but we try to, it's just business professionals all over the place, and I think that like whether it's it doesn't have to be the Midwest, if that's the lower
I
crowd.
never
It could
said
be someone that
Midwest. Who
had a.
said Midwest?
I
What
didn't say
you're
that.
making
I'm
things
just
up here?
throwing an example.
Okay.
Um, and but it could just be someone that's having like a rough day at work or someone's mom's in town and they're just like, they're doing whatever. So I think it's like how can you get them on their side? And I think like when a crowd is not working with you, sometimes there's like a lot of different ways that it can go. Sometimes it's not your night. Sometimes it really isn't your night and it's like, okay, this is on the audience to a certain extent. The second side of that coin, though, is how do you break away from your scripted material? I think what people don't really understand, great comics make it seem like you're coming up with it on the spot. But in reality, every comic is following an act. They have a script, and when an audience is not connecting with that, I don't believe in being headstrong and finishing the script because that is not what the audience came to do. You came to make a connection with an audience, and if they're not feeling it, great comics will have either outs to go, all right, I'm going to go into new jokes that I have and let me go into something different. Or they might say, hey, let me try to engage with the crowd to get them back on my side. Let me try to kind of say, all right, that's when people will engage in crowd work and they'll try to basically get some laughs in a very organic way because comedy is all about momentum. So whatever that momentum, you put your key in the ignition and whatever is going to get that car to start going is what you got to go with. And so I think a lot of comedians have kind of that like exit shoot, like that pull in
Right.
case of emergency. And that could be going into crowd work to win a crowd back over. Where are you from? What do you do for a living? And then trying to make jokes out of that. Or it could go into be like, okay, when I was prepping for this event, I'm doing my A side material. Let me go into my B side material and pick up where I left off. The way that a lot of comedians structure their sets, openers and closers. Maybe you throw a closer that you have like in the middle of your set to get them back going. So, what is kind of your cheese slice that everyone's gonna love and getting that in. So it's a lot of it's just about momentum. And if you being able to go off script and adapt to in order to get that momentum back. You just have to kind of come up with a plan and going back to bombing, having that experience to go, okay, this didn't work well here, and then I made that change this way. I think that that's really critically important of adaptability.
Right. And on our side of it, it's there's a couple rules that I kind of keep in my head. First of all, you have to be careful not to get mad at the audience. Believe it or not. And again, in a comedy club, I think it's a little bit different. But sometimes, you're really out there, you got everything clicking, and there's just no noise. And and sometimes the instinct, it's not conscious, it's an unconscious thing, is to start almost getting ticked off at the audience. And I will tell you one of the things, stories I'm not very proud of, but probably 20 years ago at least. But I was in the mid zest, and I began to almost snipe at the audience. I remember an exact line that I said. This is a workshop. I had them all for 2 days. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was strapped to that audience for 2 days. And I think at one point I was so annoyed that I said something and I said, well, you know, if you weren't from Minnesota, you'd probably find that funny. But here we're not
Oh,
really finding
no.
a whole lot funny, are we? And I saw that audience go from low reacting to angry. And and so it's a cautionary tale of, okay, don't make that one again.
Hmm.
So one is, I think you just gotta keep going. It's like an athlete, just keep running the race, run it to
Hmm.
your best ability. But Kevin, how do you know whether it's you or the audience?
I think a lot of it is I think most comics will say it's on the audience, like initially. I think, and that's because they have material that they've done it a ton of times in front of, and they know that this material kills.
Hmm.
When I was during the pandemic, I had the opportunity to do corporate comedy shows with like the best comedians in the country. They otherwise would have been in theaters, but now they're in my Zoom. So like Jessica Kirson is a really good example where I got to watch her. I mean, she's actually an anomaly. She would kill every single time. But it was like when you would get an audience that like was not belly over laughing, like could not kill it. I was like, that is the audience. And it is this moment where you go, I'm killing in 9 out of 10 of these events. This audience is just kind of dead. And, I think that that's the beauty of a lot of comics just get reps. They know their stuff works and they go, can't please everybody. And so it's
Okay.
this idea of like, we're not here to please everybody. But then when I'd see stuff like that, just continue to use Jessica as an example, she's a master of seeing it's not working. And then she would do this thing where she would like turn to the audience, turn to like, when she does it on stage, she turns to the curtain and she'll start to talk to herself and she'll be like, yeah, I think it's just the audience. I think that there's something wrong with the audience and I think they're just having a bad day. And she'll just like go on a monologue
Right.
and she'll like tell the audience that they're not behaving properly. And so sometimes I think that was like my favorite thing to see. Because I could talk about like, hey, what is my experience with it? I like to actually talk about what I've seen other comics, because we've done 600 plus corporate comedy experiences. I've seen comics perform their sets hundreds of times. So I've actually been able to like watch how these audiences react to different comics. And I'm like, man, this joke is going to kill. And so I know where those moments are going to be. And so watching Jessica do it was a great thing of like she knows how to go off script, and her off script sometimes is on script. Her off
Right.
script is a plan. And I think that like the best comedians have a plan to adapt. And they know that like if this doesn't work, this is my magic trick to get the audience back on my side. And so yeah, how do you know if it's the audience, or how do you know if it's you? I think some comics don't really have a choice in trying to say, is it me? Is that it's going so fast? So the best thing that you can do is be like, I got all the stops. I'm gonna pull out all the stops so I don't have to wonder, is it me? Is it the audience? Do I feel bad for myself? Do I start to crap on the audience and tell them it's their fault? Ultimately, maybe hurting the next comic that's going up if you're doing a show to kind of like ruin their time. So I think you have to be very careful. So I think comics, when they're on stage, they just have to know that like they're there to have a good show and they're there to have a good time. And how you're able to just get the audience back on your side, whatever that may be, it's trial and error. It's every comic is different. And the way that you learn is by doing it, not going well, but eventually doing it, and it does go well.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say, and I'm glad you said it, is you gotta you can't question your material.
Hmm.
You got to stick with what you're doing. I'll give you a little trick that I do, and it's kind of kooky, but I actually start many presentations with a video clip.
Mm.
And that video clip doesn't take days off. It's not hungry. It didn't get in a fight with its wife or husband. It's always exactly the same.
Uh-huh.
So when I show that, because I don't know if I'm always exactly the same, and so when I show that and it's dead, I already know I've taken the temperature read of the audience. When they're on the floor laughing, we're going to have a great time.
Yeah.
But now I've taken the temperature read and now I know, okay, don't get mad at the audience. And one more thing that, at least in the corporate side, we don't have to just double our effort to get the audience, because I think that's also a knee jerk reaction. Oh, I'll
Mhm.
just get more intense. Yeah,
Yeah.
wait till they see what's coming now. That can really get distracting. I think whether you've got that material you've delivered a lot or you have another way of measuring. Once the measurement's been taken, run your race.
Yeah.
Run your race.
And I think too, in the presentations style, it's like when you're doing a lot of, unless you're doing an hour on stage in stand up, which is, I always find it very hard, obviously, to do a full hour, 45 minutes. So most sets are like 15 minutes if you go to a comedy club, right? When you're doing, presentation, you have a longer period of time to trust in your material. And I think with like stand up, I had a great comic tell me, it's a rhythm. You want to have a joke like 8 to 13 seconds, and you kind of rely on that rhythm to go like, okay, we're going to try to do a setup and a joke so that about that 13-second mark, 15-second mark, I don't let it go beyond a certain amount of time. I'm getting a good reaction out of the audience or some reaction, and trying to build the momentum up. And I think like as I prepare for more keynotes, I tried to think to myself, okay, what is that 15 minutes extrapolated into 45 minutes? And I'd actually be curious to answer you or ask you, what do you think that is for like a presenter of like if that's that 8 to 13 seconds is that rhythm of a joke, what is that in terms of presenting? Is it like a new fact? Is it a minute long? Like what's the like duration?
It's a great question because, we're just hammering humor right now, humor, humor, humor. But our goal is to be as interesting and fascinating and informative as possible. And so there are about, I would say literally, because I've written a book on it, I can quote 45 ways to keep an audience interested. Humor being one of them.
Hmm.
And it's a good one, but I've seen amazing speakers that aren't funny, but they're
Hmm.
fascinating. They
Hmm.
involve the audience a lot. They do a lot with case studies, small group exercises, visuals. So to answer your question, to me, it's not 13 seconds by a long shot, particularly for a corporate gig. We are being supported by the interesting things, but our protein, the chicken, the meal we're cooking is how to sell or, how to
Hmm.
scratch your nose, whatever it is. So we don't want to go too far away from an audience thinking, well, he was funny, but I didn't learn anything. So
Hmm.
that's what we're strapped to. So to answer your question, I'm looking for, first of all, in a keynote, call it 60 minutes, at least four moves that the audience is making. And I've
Hmm.
seen comedians do it where pull someone from the audience. And I don't mean up on stage, but so you two married, and
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
you're going, you're letting some improv happen, although the guardrails that you're up against. We
Hmm.
do the same thing. I'm looking for at least four of those in an hour, about every 15 minutes, for them to be able to turn, move, talk, something that's
Yeah.
happening. I don't care if there's 1,000 of them or 20 of them out there, something where I'm not talking so much.
Hmm.
The second thing is, yeah, I would say about every 4 or 5 minutes, I just want something interesting to happen. I want to show
Hmm.
them a video. I'll give you a classic example. Sometimes I talk about it's not the words, it's the tune, how we say things. And I show them an old FedEx commercial you might remember. It's called The Stolen Idea, where this guy says, I need ideas, ideas. They're around a boardroom. And one guy goes, well, we could put everything in shipping and then just ship from one area. And everyone gets quiet. And then the boss goes, I got it. We put everything in one area. We ship it all from that area. And the guy goes, everyone's like, they're a genius. And one guy says, well, I said the same thing. Well, you did this. When he moves his hands, he goes, no, I did this. And he changes his hand direction. Point being that I now have him engaged in this idea of, oh, and now we're going to talk about, how to put more bounce and punch into our voices. So that's a classic example of I want one of those maybe every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But we are information givers. I don't want to be so much that I've lost the message. So I hope that answers your question. It's a variety of things as creatively shuffled as possible, and at least four moves that they're involved in 60 minutes. That help?
I I love that. I mean, so because that reminds me, I'd say I'm a stand-up comic. I perform stand-up comedy, but my specialty is production and creating amazing shows. And I really like to hang my hat on creating amazing experiences for audiences. And that's actually something you said every 15 minutes in an hour. That's exactly what I like to break up when we do like a virtual event. Someone's like, yeah, we just get like a comic going for like 60 minutes. How does that sound? I was like, honestly, it sounds bad. Like it sounds like you're just going to hear somebody talk, especially on Zoom. When you have a stage, you have the ability to do what you're doing in a 45-minute, a 60-minute set of like breaking it up with crowd work or breaking it up with we can crowd work on Zoom, but like physical action. Like I saw Jerry Seinfeld this past weekend and I saw him break up his sets with like a lot more like voices and a lot of physical actions that he was doing. I was like, whoa, I didn't imagine he would have so much in his bag. But it was this idea of like, okay, he's breaking a lot of it up. So what I say is like when I do these 60-minute virtual shows, I go, hey, we gotta put multiple segments in here. We're not just gonna do stand-up comedy. Let's do this thing we do called musical comedy, which is musical improv, where we'll come up with songs on the spot. And if we do it, let's do it for 30 minutes, but we'll do three different songs. So we're kind of continuously changing the temperature. Or let's do this segment called Workday Update, which is more like, it's SNL's Weekend Update, but our version. And it's like very visual heavy. And that one has multiple segments. So I am such a believer in that same mentality of like, you can't let them sit around for more than 15 minutes.
Right.
And even when we do have stand up in our shows, I'd like to recommend like, okay, let's have two stand ups at least, because that allows it to break up, and the comedian will know to break that stuff up with crowd work if it's 30 minutes or something. But yeah, I just find it so important of like, I loved what you said about, yeah, how can they move their arms? How can they move around every 15 minutes? Like, what are those different checkpoints? Because otherwise, they're going to move themselves, but they're going to be squirming or be like, I'm going to the bathroom to
Right.
kill some time because I'm tired.
Right. Right. Even jumping off that stage, you got a wireless mic. Let's go. Get into
Yeah.
that audience a little bit. But if I live in that audience, I'm wearing it out. There's an old phrase and saying in training that I always loved: emphasize everything, emphasize nothing. So you
Mm,
really got it. That's why you and I right now are looking for that rhythm, because we could just say, well, let's just keep banging. It's not a comedy show. It's a
hmm
corporate gig.
hmm
And so I want to be funny, but I got to really shuffle the deck. I want to tell you, I could go on with you for 3 days. This has been just terrific. I'm so glad we got this conversation going. How do people get a hold of you?
So you connect with me on LinkedIn is definitely the easiest way to do. Kevin Hubschmann there. I'm the only one on there with that name. So easy to
Can
find.
you spell that name? Because I had to practice saying it before we turned the mic on.
Hubschmann.
Okay.
And if you're not a LinkedIn person, go. My newsletter is great way to kind of stay in touch with what we like to talk about using comedy skills in the professional world. And it's laughrx.laugh.events. That's the newsletter, LaughRx. We basically try to take all the stuff that we talked about today and be like, okay, here's how comedians interpret this. Now this is how you can use in the professional world, and this is how neuroscience can kind of back up this advice that we're giving. And then the third thing is if your team is doing a corporate outing, whether that's you want to book a comedian, but more importantly, you want to do something that we call laughing in development, which is using applied improv and applied stand-up exercises and games to help people be more confident in speaking, or help people be more confident as a team, listen better, communicate better. Yeah, we call that laughing and development. Check out laugh.events. That's our website to book some corporate stuff. Those are a ton of fun.
Good. And I certainly proved to me. I wasn't sure when I booked you, by the way. I was like, meh, wonder if this guy can talk corporate side. He can and he does. And he just proved it to you. I loved it. Again, thank you so much for being on. Great talking to you.
Same here, Rob. Thanks again.
You bet. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. For more resources and to connect with Rob, visit thepresentationwhisperer.com.